All right, welcome back. So we are continuing with the second principle, leaders taking initiative. All right, so we are picking up from the story. The ship was loaded with really powerful leaders with all strong opinions on whether or not they should leave the Fair Havens port. They knew about the risks, they knew about the dangers, but the longer they waited, the more, dangerous the sea became. So listening to the crowd, listening to everyone on board, they wanted to go quickly because again, there were many goods, there were many grain, exports. They wanted to get that out into the market and make some money, right? Make some profit. There are all sorts of rational reasons to keep moving forward. And Apostle Paul, he had this moment, right? He seized the moment to take this initiative and he spoke out. He clearly said, this is not a good idea. He recognized the danger. He wanted to point it out clearly to everybody. Again, Paul had no rank. He's a prisoner. He has no authority. How could he even speak? Who would listen to him? And he knows that. But still, when he realized that there was a problem, when there was an issue, he had to say something. He took that initiative. He tried to bring clarity to the situation. Maybe people were not thinking straight, right? Maybe they were stressed. Common sense was missing. So he was coming in with maybe common sense, clarity, trying to sort out the problem, trying to explain to people that, hey, this is not the right time. So naturally, a leader would do this in a leadership position, somebody who's, maybe who doesn't even have the authority, has the position. But if they see something, they say something, right? In the time of crisis. And, a leader in this situation wouldn't say, oh, yeah, we may have a problem here. Somebody should do something about it, right? Somebody else should do something about it. No, Apostle Paul came up and he's saying that, hey, this is a problem. This is a problem. We need to solve this. Let's solve it, right? Let's take care of this issue. And while everyone else is probably still analyzing the situations, trying to figure out what to do, but Paul already had it sized up, right? He had this instinct, he had this experience, and he trusted his judgment. He knew that it was correct. So that's why he boldly and confidently spoke out, trying to alert everybody that, hey, let's avert this situation. So we want to use our second example here. Nehemiah, a very great classical biblical example of a leader who took initiative. So 500 years before Apostle Paul, Nehemiah was already uniting people in Jerusalem, rebuilding the walls for that city, doing that in just 52 days. This is a very legendary, remarkable display of strategic initiative and courageous leadership. And Nehemiah and Apostle Paul had similarities in their story. Apostle Paul was a prisoner, a nobody. Nehemiah, too, was, if you looked at the rankings, he was considered a nobody, not very special. He was a servant. He was a servant in the palace, never visited his homeland, but when he learned that Jerusalem was in a ruined condition, it sparked something in his heart. It unleashed this potential of his leadership ability through this situation. And of course, Nehemiah was human, right? He was man, meaning he had the choice. He had an option. It would have been so easy for him to just say, it's not my problem. I'll just ignore, yeah, okay, Jerusalem's a big mess. I'm sure somebody else will take care of it and clean it up. I don't need to do it. But something happened with Nehemiah. Again, it sparked something in his heart. Nehemiah had a comfortable life, right? He was geographically very far from Jerusalem, right? Quite a distance. And he could have simply said, sorry, I feel bad for the city. I feel sorry for you guys. But somebody else can do it. But that's not what leaders do. That's not what leaders should say. They should take initiative. They rise up and they build. And that's what Nehemiah did. So we have a really great case study to look at in Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a good case study of how true leaders take initiative. And the first thing he did was he identified the problem. That's the first step. What is the issue? What is the problem? You have to identify it, make it clear. So what was the problem? Was it lack of funds? Was it lack of experience? Was there no architect to have experience to build out this city? Was there a lack of manpower, not enough people to build it? So Jerusalem was in ruins during that time. And Nehemiah, again, it struck his heart. Something happened. It struck him that he wept. He prayed and he wept. He cried over it. And then looking at the problem, he realized that was not the problem. Lack of funds, having no experience, having no architect, having no manpower, those were not the problems. The problem was that God was not for the project because nobody was weeping for it, right? The problem was that his people was very unfaithful towards that project, towards that town, towards God. There was a broken covenant. That was the root of the problem. That's the real problem. It's not money. It's not people. It's not experience. Something was cut off between his people with God. So that's what he did first. He identified the problem. Okay, after praying, after weeping, that is the issue. So it was done through prayer. It was realized through repentance. It was realized through tears. So he begged and he prayed to God for help to bring restoration to his people's city. So after prayer, after realizing, identifying the problem, then action started to happen, right? Then came action. The action was now making a plan and a solution. So Nehemiah, what did he do? He went to the king and he asked the king for permission. He asked for permission to, hey, please let me return to my city, my homeland, to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. So, when we read the scripture, right? When we read about the story, we may miss this. We could miss this. We could miss that. Actually, Nehemiah already planned on the obvious things. He already prepared what to explain to the king, right? I know simply, when we read it, we just say, yeah, he just went to the king, asked the king if he can go, and the king said, okay. Okay, great. But actually, there's a lot more to it than just that, right? The king was going to ask him questions. You go and you ask somebody to have a leave of absence, to step away. That person is going to ask you some details, like what's going on? Is everything okay? What are you going to do? So he planned on the obvious, Nehemiah, right? He knew the king was going to ask him questions like, how long is your journey going to be? When are you coming back? Nehemiah knew how long it'll take, right? He made his plans. He knew what was required. So he had to prepare the answers. So that's something if we don't read deeply or not think about it, we may have missed this. There's a lot of planning that went into this project. Even before the project started, there's already a plan. So Nehemiah did his calculations. He knew how much lumber, he knew how many beams and scaffolds, and he anticipated too what problems he's going to face. Like no plans are perfect, right? You always have a plan B or a plan C just in case something happens. So he anticipated the problems that he might face. He asked for letters of conveyance, meaning letters of support, permission to clear or to pass through this territory without any issues. He had a strategy in place. So he was not making things up on the fly, right? He counted the cost, he formulated a plan, and he stuck with it. And that is initiative right there, everybody. Taking initiative. Taking initiative, I know we may read about it and hear the movies and, oh, let's charge, let's go in, charge with, lead everybody into war. But there's planning involved too, right? It's not just charging in blindly. There's a strategy. So that's the example of Nehemiah taking initiative. He came in, he divided up the work, he put key people in place, he gave assignments, gave roles, and everyone shared in the work with him. And they did the work, but they did it together with one heart as a team. They were unified. And part of this was because it was very clear what they needed to do. It was well defined. And the tasks were very achievable, right? Setting milestones. We're going to hit this. We're going to do this by this time, this time, this time. And as they hit those points, as they accomplished it, it built up morale, right? It built up trust in him as a leader. And as the case study continues with Nehemiah, we see that the city was rebuilt in a remarkably short time. They did it so quickly. And there are many people who think they, have the answer to the problem, but you have to ride pretty much the plan from idea to completion. That is the success. That is how you measure the success, right? It's not just starting with the plan, not finishing, or having no plan and expecting to finish, but it is from the beginning, from idea to completion. So the leaders that we're trying to be, right? I remember sitting in meetings, listening to sermons, um, listening to pastor, and he would remind us that, hey, don't be the leaders who start something and don't finish, because that's not what leaders do. You don't just start something and not finish it, but you have to drive the car, right? Drive the car all the way to the destination, all the way to the journey, and then that is done. Ride it to the end. So organizing, moving others along with you for this journey. So for Nehemiah to do this, to complete this, he had to have coworkers. And you notice that he knew his workers, right? He knew them by name. He knew them by their personality, by their skills, and it was recorded precisely what section each one built in Nehemiah chapter 3. You can see the detail. That's evidence and proof that he knew his people. He knew his team members, and he was committed to them, and they were committed to him. And intimately, they were involved with every phase of this project until it was done, completion. So, for example, he knew where they were located, right? It was a wide expanse of space. So he knew some people lived in this area. So they assigned geographically, your assignment is within this area. And the priests built sections closest to the temple. And there were incentives too. It's like people who did excellent work also received rewards if part of the wall was next to their own house, right? If their house was close to the wall, then they had extra incentive to do a good job, right? They wanted to make that extra strong because it's their property that it's protecting. So they wanted to assure through this planning that there was a lot of pride in taking place in the work, right? A lot of quality. So the city was in ruin for 100 years. And for 100 years, no one came to suggest even rebuilding this project. So how did Nehemiah, right, a newcomer he didn't even live there, right? This was somebody who did not even live there, and he came all the way from his city to come and rebuild this city. How was he able to gather people's hearts, to get them together, to challenge them, to get them to look positively on this project? Because, I think if you've been living there for so many years, you've seen the rubble and the destruction, and there's no hope. You never thought about rebuilding it up. So somebody who doesn't live there comes and tells you, hey, pick up your hammer, let's get to work. That's pretty challenging, right? If you think about it. So again, Nehemiah had to come with some sort of strategy or plan. He needed to know how to motivate people. And he had to do it without lying to them. He's not going to trick them. He's not going to use theatrics to try to impress them. But what did he do? How did he convince them? He simply shared the vision, right? He shared a vision. He shared a vision in a way that people could understand. They could understand, they could really grasp and visualize together to see, oh, what is the final result going to be? How is it going to benefit myself? How is it going to benefit this community or this city or our people, our community? And Nehemiah came in and he probably would have had to done this to win their hearts, to explain the goal very clearly and that it was attainable, meaning it's not impossible. We can do it. Right? You have to give them hope. You can't just give them this huge project with no hope. No, there's a way to do this. So in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 18, it says, Nehemiah says, I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And they replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. So he must have given some very good presentation, right? He would have had to presented something very impressive to these group of people who are going to dedicate their, you know, a lot of time and resources to help rebuild this wall. And it worked because it said, let us start rebuilding, right? They all said together. So Nehemiah really helped the people see what it is that they're about to do, right? He helped them to see that this is a really great work. This is a work of God that we're going to embark on. It was spiritually important. So by doing this, he must have been very sincere, very believable, very trustworthy. He must have been enthusiastic and optimistic, which is very important too, being very optimistic in the project. And by doing these things, amazingly, it can be very contagious, meaning it spreads very quickly. It spreads throughout people, throughout this idea, and they will soon catch the vision. And again, Nehemiah does this with sincerity, with energy, enthusiasm, and optimism. So these are powerful tools and components that we can reference to, right? That we can learn from this case study from Nehemiah. That having these things, sincerity, energy, enthusiasm, optimism, it can be, again, very contagious, right? It can spread amongst people to help them catch the vision. The next thing we're talking about here, working alongside one another, working alongside people. So for this project to work, you can't really have a very passive type of leader. So Nehemiah was not passive, right? The leaders are not very passive. They work and they are as diligent or more than anyone else on their team, in their group. Nehemiah, he didn't just sit at his desk or, and just waiting there, just watching people, but he was on the ground. He was working alongside everyone else. He was very dedicated. And again, by doing this, you'll see that it can become very contagious, right? The word here is contagious. It can spread. Seeing the leader an example, you see your leader working alongside you, you know, struggling and suffering together with you. It's something special, right? It builds up really, uh, this really desirable image to wanting to serve more, to work together more. And so this is what happened. The people working together with Nehemiah, they followed him even more, served him even more, working together. So while they were working on this project, there were obstacles, right? There's always obstacles. Any type of work for our Lord, for the kingdom, will face obstacles. So nothing different here. Nehemiah, his team, this project, they faced people from the outside ridiculing them. They were creating conspiracies. They were discouraging them, really opposing them. And all of Satan's work, just throwing it at them, right? Trying to slow them down, trying to discourage them as much as they can. But then Nehemiah took the initiative. He kept his path. right? He was being strongly motivated. He was organized. He had this plan and he was motivating people. And all of these elements that he's doing kept the project going. So very much like Apostle Paul, right? Nehemiah was not afraid to take the initiative. He was not just going to sit back and say, somebody else can do this, right? I feel for you, I have empathy for you, but somebody else can do. No, he took the initiative. He said it was me, right? Like I should pray, I should weep, I should repent first for my people. So that leads us to our third principle for today, having good judgment. So a leader uses good judgment. And now we go back, right? We go back to Apostle Paul and the crew and the boats at the Fair Havens port. And again, Paul trying to warn them, try to convince them not to go. Look at the storm, look at the wind. Are you guys crazy? Why do you want to go into the storm? Don't go. But the opinions were, again, more favorable. People kept saying, we want to go. We have to go. There's so much cargo here. There's profit to be had. Very logical reasons to go. And if they did not go, they would lose this opportunity. So this decision was made for purely very pragmatic reasons, very logical reasons. I mean, if you look at the logic, you'll think and you analyze it, it's like, yeah, like you should go. Look at all the reasons. It makes sense. It's very logical, right? It's backed up by evidence. Yeah, it's good to go. And they had they had their own selfish desires and reasons to do it. And the decision was not made by wisdom, right? It's more of just personal gain, self gain, and self desire. That was pretty much the primary reason of why they wanted to go. So Apostle Paul here looks at it and he thinks it's a big gamble, it's a big risk. So a leader doesn't subject his people to unnecessary hazards without wise reasons. So here, the captain, the centurion, the leaders of that boat, they were gambling. They were risking the lives of everyone on that ship. And they were just hoping, right? Going into the wind and hoping, okay, I hope everything will work out. I hope this wind won't be too destructive and that we can make it. So they're kind of going on blind luck. Because, I mean, who here on Earth can predict what the winds are going to do, right? Even with our technology today, it's very unpredictable what the weather is going to be. So imagine back then, how unpredictable was their situation? And they're just going into it with blind luck. So this is not very wise leadership. Um, this is the fastest way actually to lose credibility as a leader is to make these type of unwise, foolish decisions that leads people down a storm or a cliff or somewhere that can hurt them. That can hurt your credibility as a leader. So many young leaders, right? When we're growing, we're developing ourselves, we're young leaders, we tend to go without looking, right? We lead without looking where we're going. We don't carefully account for the cost. We don't really pre-plan or have a plan B or a plan C, and we're just not careful in general. And everyone's guilty of this, right? Everyone who's developing to be a leader. We've all experienced this, or we will experience this, where we're just in a situation where we wish, oh, I wish I could have planned a little better. I wish I would have had a plan B or a C because something is not going to work and nothing is perfect. Something will go wrong. I always need a backup plan. Something should, I should have a backup plan. So we need to remember this. We need to be sensitive to our surroundings and to our people and to seek wise counsel. I think that's something that young leaders also may not do sometimes is seeking counsel. That there are other people who went through what they went through before, but either for one reason or another, either you're too busy or maybe you're too arrogant or whatever, you don't seek that counsel. Or that counsel is given to you, but you don't receive it and you do it your way. those things can happen. So that's what happens here with this crew, with this boat. They had their own plan. They had their own thinking. They wanted to do it their own way. But we know man's way without God's counsel goes very awry, right? It doesn't go well. It doesn't last very long. Even if it feels like, oh yeah, I succeeded, but it won't stand for very long. So Apostle Paul was wise. He knew this. He was the wise counsel who offered advice to the crew, but they ignored him. And so what happens? The storm came. It rocked the ship. Everybody panicked. Everyone was, panicking and they were, oh, we're gonna die. And Paul he warned them. He told them this is gonna happen. But from man's viewpoint, right? We receive revelation, we receive counsel, but from man's viewpoint, sometimes the problems will seem like it will devour us, right? We're in the situation where the storm comes and we think, oh, there's no hope. We're all doomed. Everything's ending. It's all over. But it's very different with Apostle Paul, a person who's a godly person who has wise counsel. To Apostle Paul, to him, it's just a journey. And in his heart and in his mind, he's saying all the time that God is in control. God is in control. So God chose a leader and placed him in the right place at the right time. And God had this plan for Paul. He planned to use Paul in this situation to be a witness, to show all the prisoners there, to show all the crew members there that somebody like Paul can rise up and be in full command of the ship, that they can emerge as a leader. This is going to be a testimony to God, right? If this happens. So we looked at leadership so far, right? And we'll just kind of sidetrack a little bit here, talk a bit about leadership, but also comparisons with management. So there's an important distinction here between leadership and management. So there was a scholar, his name is J.P. Cotter, and he described this. He said, leadership fosters creativity and encourages new ideas. In contrast, management prioritizes efficiency and streamlining operations. People management are leaders who inspire and motivate their teams, while managers, on the other hand, are more concerned about coordination and organization. So everyone wants to be seen as a strong leader, right? And not just an efficient manager. So the term manager suggests that manager is very small, like a small bureaucrat, right? And all they do is they just enforce policies and they just punish others who violate those policies. And yes, it's true, right? That's part of the job. This may be the job the manager does, but we have to also try to get rid of this preconception, right? We have to see that there's a value between manager and leadership, right? The two of them have really good values that they offer from leadership side and from management side. So from our examples, right, we see Paul and Nehemiah. Yeah, we always refer to them as leaders, but they were also managers, right? They utilized both. They utilized both leadership and management. It wasn't just some top leader sitting, in the top office and just commanding everyone else like slaves. But again, they were on the ground working together. They were leading as collaborators, as co-workers, but also working together to manage things. So here's hopefully a helpful chart that distinguishes, right, the difference between a leader and a manager. So again, it's not about versus, right? It's not about a leader versus manager and the two kind of fighting against each other. No, they're interrelated, right? They're interconnected. So leadership is about creating change. It's inspiring others to a larger vision. It's kind of rallying everybody together, rallying your team together as in one heart and one mind to perform a meaningful action. And then management is all about the details. you figure out how things are going to get done, the budgets, what's required. It's just getting to that point. How are we going to get to that point? The details in between. There's a famous leader, author, authority and leadership. His name is Peter Drucker, and he's an expert in management. And he said this: there is nothing worse than doing the wrong things very well. There's nothing worse than doing the wrong things very well. So we need to be careful we're not doing the wrong things. And not only that, but doing it very efficiently. So the description gives leaders this more positive appeal, right? When you look into management and you look at leaders, you think of, oh, leadership is more positive. And but from a practical perspective, we see that both are very equal and necessary. It's both needed to effectively run an organization. Inspiration and vision is very important, but they also require execution. They also require a plan of attack. How are we going to perform this? How are we going to steward our resources? Who's going to be responsible or accountable for success? Because you can always have somebody go up and give a vision, but if nothing happens, nobody's on board to do it, it doesn't really lead to anything. So I wanted to conclude the first part of this lecture with this for today with a story. It's just kind of a little personal testimony. So I'm very fortunate to have um, good examples in my life of real leadership up close and personal. Um, I'd have to say part of the leadership that I've seen in my life is from my father. It's from our Olivet University founder, Dr. David Jang. It's also from our former chairman, Dr. Ralph D. Winter, and Dr. William Wagner, our previous university president. So they all had something in common. Um, they were all founders and presidents and leaders of organizations, and they all sat at the very top position. And they all started with very humble beginnings too. Like my father, when he started, he just escaped from the Vietnam War, and he was a refugee uh, who just arrived to the United States. He just had $20 in his pocket. That's all he had. But he kept working, and he had to do it because of survival, doing many jobs. And eventually, he started his own company and became a well-respected figure in the community. And he's living well from that humble beginning. Same thing with our denomination and our churches and our ministries. Back then, when the university started, we had nothing. There was really very little resources. But through the vision of the founder rallying together the team and the troops and other leaders, getting advice, counsel from Dr. Winter, our former chairman, and working with Dr. William Wagner on the details and implementing the plan, we were able to establish this university from the ground up. So I was able to be a witness to both of these experiences. I saw how my dad worked when I was younger, how he had to really roll up his sleeves and get his hands dirty, like going into the warehouses. We had to relabel everything and, catching mice and, all the dirty jobs that you don't hear about that leaders do. They did all those little things. And then being an OU, doing all the paperwork and the meetings and all those little steps to get towards where we are today. I got to see all that. I got to see the dirty work in the background in order to get these institutions to where they are. So, but there's a difference too. So I talked about the similarities, but there's also a difference in how these leaders live and how they dedicate their life So one is for, self-success, self-gain. I mean, yeah, he raised his family. He's doing it for his family too. But in the end, it was for worldly purposes. And then you look at the other side, and it's a contrast. What? One side is for wages and the other is for God's kingdom. So if you were to compare the two leaders, uh, based on the standards, right? What standards are we using when we're comparing these leaders? My father, the OU founder, the OU chair, the previous president. How do you contrast these leaders? Well, one is for wages. If you compare wages, then obviously I think my father would win, right? He probably earned more money than those leaders who were serving in ministry. But what's the more important standard that we're measuring to? That is what was contributed to God's kingdom. Which organization, which leader gave more towards what God desired, right? Towards God's kingdom. And obviously we can see that now it totally leans on the other side with our ministry leaders. So in God's eyes, which organization, which leader is more valuable? I mean, both of them have similarities. Both went from the bottom to the top with nothing. They built from nothing to something. But which one is more valuable? Which organization is more valuable? How do we measure? And again, the bottom line is the profit, right? What kind of profit are we talking about? Is it the profit of wages, the profit of what's in your bank account, or profit of counting souls? How many souls were saved? Which organization brought in more? So as we wrap up the lecture for this part, I just wanted to throw that in there. It's just something for us to all think about. Right? We constantly need to remember this. What are we doing this for? What is the profit? What is the bottom line here? What kind of profit are we bringing to our owner? Which owner are we serving? So we are the people of Christ, and we should remember this. So the bottom line, as a leader, what am I bringing to the profit for the kingdom? And developing each and every one of us, right? Myself, you, as we're developing our leadership skills, how is it going to benefit? What are we going to use those leadership skills and experience for? Is it going to facilitate and help the kingdom, or is it going to hinder it, slow it down, or prevent it from happening? All right, so that wraps up the lecture for this part. Do you want to take another little break, or do you want to jump into the next guest speaker lecture? Opinions?
Yeah, I think we can continue.
Okay, one vote continue. Anyone else? I got a second?
Little break.
Little break.
Okay.
All right, let's take a little break. How about a 5-minute break? Is that okay? Okay, let's be back here at 9:50.